I'm Richard Ingram, LaGrange, Georgia. We're here on Lafayette Square, downtown LaGrange, in front of this magnificent statue of the Marquis de Lafayette. Today is Lafayette's birthday. He was born September the 6th, 1757. He's 263 years old. 2 years ago, with the help of Representative Randy Nix, the state of Georgia, the House, the Senate, and the governor signed off on proclamations designating every September the 6th as Lafayette Day in Georgia. LaGrange was way ahead of that curve. Over 10 years ago, in 2007, Mayor Jeff Lucan signed a proclamation designating September the 6th Lafayette Day in LaGrange. So what's the fuss? What's the big deal about celebrating Lafayette's birthday, and why should we care? Lafayette defined the promise of America. Lafayette defines the idea of America. David McCullough is America's favorite historian. He says that some words just lift you off the ground. Listen to what Lafayette said. Listen to his hope for America. The welfare of America is intimately connected with the happiness of all mankind. She'll become the respectable and safe asylum of virtue, integrity, tolerance, equality, and a peaceful liberty. Lafayette set the bar high, and he honestly believed Americans were good for it. Lafayette thought America would become the home of liberty, equality, and justice, the three great ideas we act on. Lafayette was a champion of human rights. He was an apostle of liberty. He told James Monroe he had three priorities. First, to see America strong. Second, to see the French-American friendship thrive. And third, to see slaves freed. Slavery, he said, just didn't fit. Lafayette argued liberty wherever he saw it wanting. Independence movements in North America, South America, Italy, Ireland, Greece, Spain. Lafayette was on it. Civil rights for French Protestants and French Jews. Lafayette fought for them. Lafayette is about a way of thinking, a way of seeing the world. And he broadens our prospect. He broadens our perspective. This statue is our link to that legacy. Lafayette inspires, and whatever inspires you influences you, affects habits of the mind and the heart. Lafayette's motto was "Cour non," or why not? It was an invitation to make things better. Lafayette illuminates. One person with purpose and perseverance can change the world. And Lafayette unites. He reminds us that character thrives on courage and gratitude. He reminds us that democracy flourishes on respect and give and take. And Lafayette entertains. His story is just great fun. So, pay attention. Give us an undistracted moment. You're going to learn why Lafayette inspires. I'll be back.
Hi, I'm Taryl Anderson, LaGrange, Georgia. The Marquis de Lafayette was a champion of human rights. His motto was, "Cour non," or why not? It was an open and optimistic invitation to make the world better. But his watchword was liberty. For Lafayette, liberty was something real and worthwhile. He was known as the apostle of liberty. To him, liberty, equality, and justice was more than just stock phrase. When he first arrived this newly declared nation, was not named the United States. He just called it America. Ironically, the first Americans he met when his ship first landed near Georgetown, South Carolina at midnight, June 13, 1777, were slaves. Lafayette loved America and the idea of America from the beginning. His hopes were high for what he might accomplish for liberty and equality and justice. Listen to what he wrote his wife, Adrienne, 6 days before he landed. The welfare of America is intimately connected with the happiness of mankind. She will become the respectable and safe asylum of virtue, integrity, tolerance, equality, and a peaceful liberty. What a spectacular vision by the adventurous young Frenchman for the still very young nation. And yet, slavery did not fit with those ideas. Lafayette read, he listened, he pondered. It was his way. One highly influential book was Reflections of Slavery by the Marquis de Lafayette. John Adams, who was then America's foreign minister to Britain, sent Lafayette writings by another British abolitionist, Granville Sharp. In 1772, Sharp had been responsible for the edict that any slave setting foot on English soil thereupon was free. Lafayette wrote friends he knew were sympathetic to his views on slavery: John Adams, Henry Knox, John Jay, and Alexander Hamilton. He asked Hamilton to sponsor his membership in the Association Against the Slavery of Negroes. He joined the French Society of the Friends of Blacks, and in the same year, the New York Manumission Society, which supported New York's African free schools. Lafayette concluded that slavery was not what America was about. Together with Thomas Clarkson, another prominent British abolitionist, Lafayette worked to persuade the French National Assembly to abolish their nation's African slave trade. The same abolitionist wrote later that Marquis frequently said, "I would never have drawn my sword in the cause of America if I could have conceived that thereby I was founding a land of slavery." Furthermore, said Clarkson, Lafayette is a real gentleman and of soft and gentle manners. I have seen him put out temper, but never at any time except when slavery was the subject. Well, before James Monroe was elected America's 5th president, Lafayette told Monroe he had 3 concerns for America: to strengthen its ties to France, to strengthen the ties of the 13 states in a national union, and to do away with slavery. In France, May 11, 1791, Lafayette spoke to the French National Assembly. He argued that free men of color in the French colonies were citizens and deserved the rights of citizens. The Assembly agreed. When colonists in the present-day country of Haiti declined to comply, it triggered a violent revolution there. Later, Lafayette and Thomas Jefferson exchanged views on expanding slavery into America's new Western territories. Jefferson argued that once slavery moved out west, it would dilute, wither, and die. Lafayette was not persuaded. "Are you sure, my dear friend?" he said. "That extending the principle of slavery to the new raised states is a method to facilitate the means of getting rid of it? I would have thought that by spreading the prejudices, habits, and calculations of planters over a larger surface, you rather increase the difficulties of final liberation." All his life, Lafayette argued for the abolition of slavery and of the African slave trade. Thomas Clarkson called him a true friend of the cause. Slavery was a major concern, but it was not his singular human rights focused. He was a friend of Native Americans. They called him Keyala, or Great Warrior, and they trusted him. He defended the rights of Jews and Protestants during the French Revolution. He promoted the causes of women. He supported independent movements throughout the Western Hemisphere, not only here in North America, but in Poland, Ireland, Italy, Greece, and South America, to say nothing of France. Simon Bolivar looked to Lafayette as the icon of liberty. Lafayette inspires. What a legacy. What is your legacy? Happy birthday to the Marquis de Lafayette.
Hi, I'm Toni Anderson from LaGrange, Georgia. During the American Revolutionary War, many colonists felt that African Americans didn't have the ability or the willingness to fight, but the Marquis de Lafayette disagreed. He lobbied Virginia Governor Thomas Nelson to welcome African Americans into the ranks, and because of that, we have this remarkable story worthy of a movie or theatrical rendering of James Armistead. James Armistead was a slave from New Kent County, Virginia. Growing up, he was companion to his owner's son, William Armistead, Jr. When William was being taught how to read and write, James, seated next to him, learned also. When they were adults, James became William's slave. William Armistead, Jr. supplied the commissariat at Williamsburg for the Continental Army. There, James helped load and unload supplies. So it was here at Williamsburg that Lafayette first became acquainted with James. He noted that James was articulate, observant, soft-spoken, and intelligent. Lafayette was impressed. Exactly how it happened is unclear, but James volunteered to serve under Lafayette's command. At the time, Lafayette was tailing and harassing Lord Cornwallis's British troops stationed throughout Virginia. Lafayette needed intelligence, and he had an idea. He knew that Cornwallis had invited blacks to escape slavery by crossing over to British lines. He figured that a black spy could easily penetrate enemy lines, but it would take wits to gather useful information about the British Army and somehow transmit it back to the Americans. Furthermore, why would an escaped slave want to return to the American side? Who could handle, convincingly, this kind of subterfuge? Lafayette knew of only one man, James Armistead. Surprisingly, James volunteered for the task, and thankfully, his owner, William Armistead Jr., granted permission. So James began penetrating British lines. Of course, once begun, he could have remained behind their lines and under their protection. After all, escaped slaves were promised freedom in return for bolting the American cause. But he didn't. Maybe James didn't want to leave his family. Maybe he thought the British position untenable. Or maybe he saw something in Lafayette that inspired loyalty. We may never know, but one thing is for certain, James didn't bolt. In time, James Armistead reported Cornwallis's plan to fortify Yorktown. This important knowledge enabled Lafayette to strategically deploy his limited forces. And then came a most unusual turn of events. Lord Cornwallis recruited James to spy for him against Lafayette. Imagine that. James Armistead became a double agent, for he could not well refuse Cornwallis. But his true loyalty was never in doubt. Armistead was loyal to Lafayette and the American cause. James intentionally passed on faulty information to Cornwallis about Lafayette's position and troop strength, and as a result, Cornwallis believed Lafayette's force was greater than it really was. When British defeat was inevitable, Cornwallis surrendered at the Battle of Yorktown, October 19, 1781. Afterwards, he made a cordial visit to Lafayette's headquarters, which was the gentlemanly thing to do. Whom should he be surprised to find there but none other than his own spy, James Armistead? After the war, many Virginia slaves were granted freedom in return for their service as soldiers in the War for Independence. But James Armistead was not, because he had been listed as a spy, and therefore technically was not considered to be a soldier in the ranks. This was indeed a bitter blow. So James began the arduous quest to gain his freedom. On December 4th, 1784, James submitted his petition for manumission to the Virginia General Assembly, but it was denied. When the Marquis de Lafayette learned that James was still in slavery, he wrote a letter testifying to the essential service James had provided at Yorktown, stating how James had carried out, at his own great peril, the misleading reports to Lord Cornwallis about Lafayette's troops. Lafayette encouraged the Virginia Assembly to accord James Armistead every honor appropriate to his service. 2 years later, armed with Lafayette's letter of endorsement, James Armistead submitted a second petition for freedom, and this time he prevailed. On January 9th, 1786, 5 years after Cornwallis's surrender, James Armistead was granted freedom. In grateful appreciation for the help of his French general, James adopted the surname Lafayette. To the Marquis de Lafayette, happy birthday.
Hi, I'm Dee Dee Williams in LaGrange, Georgia. Lafayette had an idea. It obsessed him. It was a great idea, even though it didn't work out. He was in Cadiz, Spain, preparing for a joint Franco-Spanish attack on England. He received news of a preliminary treaty ending the American Revolutionary War. On February 5th, 1783, he wrote a long 8-page letter of congratulations to General George Washington. In the middle, with no warning, he uploaded a blockbuster of an idea. What if he and Washington would purchase an estate, hire slaves to work it, pay them for their work, teach them to read and write, prohibit whippings, treat them decently, and then free them? With Washington's prestige, it could become a model to be produced across America. Here was an emancipation proposal. If it worked, and why would it not, thought Lafayette, he would extend the reach of the project to French colonies in the West Indies. This was exciting, Washington replied on April 5th, 1783. It was so laudable a work, he said, and striking evidence of the benevolence of your heart. They would talk details later. A year later, Lafayette visited Washington at Mount Vernon for 2 weeks. Surely they talked about it, but we don't know the content of those conversations. What we do know is that Lafayette could not let it go. He wrote Washington on February 6, 1786, almost 3 years later, "Another secret I entrust to you, my dear General, is that I have purchased for 125,000 French livres a plantation in the colony of Cayenne, and I am going to free my Negroes in order to make that experiment which you know is my heart's passion." This project was no secret. Lafayette enlisted none other than King Louis XVI to be a part. A year earlier, on June 6, 1785, Lafayette wrote a letter to the king outlining the project design. They would go together and purchase property in Cayenne, French Guiana, South America. There, they would pay slaves, educate them, and free them. And when the king failed to follow up, Lafayette decided to forge ahead on his own. On December 29, 1785, Lafayette bought 2 plantations in Cayenne. One was called Maripa, and the other St. Regis. A third plantation, La Fromagée, he renamed Les Drians in honor of his wife. The whole of it came to be named La Gabrielle, since it sat at the foot of a mountain of the same name. On May 10, 1786, Washington wrote a reply to Lafayette. He called the project generous and noble proof of your humanity. Would to God a like spirit would diffuse itself generally into the minds of the people of this country, but I despair of seeing it. Washington knew slavery was a blight on what America promised and professed to be. When he died in 1799, Washington's will stipulated freedom for all of his slaves. Lafayette likely influenced that decision. Jean-François de Richepre was the manager of the property. He was to implement Lafayette's ideals. It was an uphill battle. Locals opposed the project. It was forbidden by law to teach slaves to read and write, so the work was hard. By the late 1780s, Lafayette had become embroiled in French politics. Day-to-day decisions fell to Adrienne. She was an attentive steward. But it all crashed on August 19th, 1792, in the terribly dark days of the French Revolution. Although Lafayette narrowly escaped the guillotine, he was soon captured and imprisoned in Austria. The French state confiscated his property, all of his property, including La Gabrielle. It was renamed the Habitation of Spices. On return after 5 years in prison, Lafayette was financially broke. He did negotiate a deal whereby the state would pay him 140,000 francs for the land at Cayenne, which was near what he had invested. But there was this catch. On May 20th, 1802, Napoleon, now empowered as emperor, had reinstated slavery. Thus, as part of the deal, Lafayette would be required to cede all his rights insofar as they affected the farm laborers. He refused the deal, saying, "I declared that I would not cooperate in any kind of slave system." Lafayette's grand idea came to nothing in the end, but not for want of trying. His motto was cure none, or why not? La Gabrielle was a good example of his motto in action. Lafayette inspires. Happy birthday, Marquis de Lafayette.
Hello, I'm Catherine Matthews, LaGrange, Georgia. The Marquis de Lafayette, known as the Man in the Square, was 19 years old when he first set foot in America. He was convinced America would be a land of liberty. One might say he had an obsession with liberty that became a lifelong passion. He expressed this passion in a letter to his wife, Adrienne, when he was still in the middle of the Atlantic on his first voyage. He said, "The welfare of America is intimately connected with the happiness of all mankind. She will become the respectable and safe asylum of virtue, integrity, tolerance, equality, and a peaceful liberty." What drove him to become this extraordinary advocate of liberty? What in his past provoked this single-minded dedication to an idea? Let's start from the beginning. Lafayette was born September 6, 1757, in the Auvergne region in the south of France at the Château de Chavignac, 300 miles south of Paris. It was the peak of the Age of Enlightenment. Descartes, Rousseau, and Montesquieu were challenging the way things were. They laid the foundation for the coming social revolutions. He was born into a military family. His heritage traced back to Joan of Arc and the siege of Orleans in the 15th century. He heard thrilling stories of courage and adventure early on. His mindset was toward making something of himself, in keeping with his family tradition. Lafayette's father died at the Battle of Minden when Lafayette was just 2 years old. His mother moved them to Paris to prepare the way for her son to enter the privilege of the royal court. Lafayette was primarily raised by his grandmother and 2 aunts. His grandmother, Catherine, greatly influenced him. Lafayette observed how she treated others with kindness and respect. When he was nearly 12, he went to Paris to live with his mother. He was enrolled in the Collège de Plessis, a part of the University of Paris. He loved Latin and enjoyed translating Latin into French, which he excelled in. He won academic prizes. He became fascinated by famous Roman scholars and statesmen. They wrote about courage, duty, and revered the ideas of the Republic and individual freedoms. Ideas of liberty, equality, and justice must have taken root in young Lafayette's mind. Family, his country, and literature. These are behind his inspiration and what drove his passion for liberty. A turning point in his young life paved the way for him to pursue his passion. In 1760, nearing his 13th birthday, his mother died. A few weeks after, her father died. Lafayette was now an orphan. His inheritance made him one of the wealthiest young men in Europe. His wealth, however, was never something that consumed him. What mattered to him were the possibilities of what he could accomplish. In 1774, at the age of 17, he married Marie Adrienne Francois. She grew up 40 miles outside of Paris in the Château de LaGrange. This is our connection to Lafayette, the history behind the name of our town. On August 8, 1775, Lafayette first heard about the insurgents in America fighting for independence and liberty. He was ready to pursue his passion to fight with them. King Louis XVI told him not to go. His father-in-law was adamant he not go. Lafayette was determined. He made his decision, and when he made up his mind, there was no going back. He would go to America to fight with the insurgents for their independence. He bought his own ship, La Belle Mer, which he renamed La Victoire, and launched to America on April 20, 1777. He was commissioned a major general in the Continental Army. He became a confidant of General Washington. He was wounded in the left calf at the Battle of Brandywine. He commanded the venerated right wing at the Battle of Yorktown with Alexander Hamilton under his command. Lafayette hoped to translate America's ideal to France. His motives were questioned, and he was called to face the guillotine. Instead, on August 19, 1792, he stepped across the border into Austria. He was captured and imprisoned for 5 years. Napoleon interceded, but even he feared Lafayette's popularity. Lafayette was forced to live in exile in Denmark for 2 years. When he returned to France, it was as a gentleman farmer at his wife's estate. In 1824, President James Monroe invited him back to America for one last visit. He was the guest of the nation. Over 13 months, he visited all 24 states. He was warmly welcomed everywhere. Until his death on May 20, 1834, he remained a steadfast champion of liberty. He supported independence movements in Ireland, Italy, South America, and Spain, among others. He advocated freedom for slaves and civil rights for French Protestants and Jews. Lafayette's legacy reaches here, LaGrange, Georgia. It is a pleasure to honor him on his 263rd birthday. Happy birthday, Marquis de Lafayette.
Hi, I'm Alex Hughes, LaGrange, Georgia. The Marquis de Lafayette was tireless in his effort to get France to support America in its war for independence. Foreign Minister Vergennes was, next to Benjamin Franklin, the diplomat of the age. Vergennes said Lafayette would sell Versailles if it would help America. France's role in the American Revolution cannot be overstated, nor can Lafayette's influence on that account. When Thomas Jefferson was serving as America's minister to France, he once commented that where he, Jefferson, held the nail, it was Lafayette who hammered it home. Stanley Itzerda, a Lafayette scholar at Cornell University, said, "The Americans did not win their independence alone. It was won with the moral, financial, and military support of France." Keep in mind, it was Foreign Minister Vergennes who coaxed Spain along. Early on, Spain followed France's lead in contributing funds, even if less enthusiastically. The Treaty of Alliance with France on February 6, 1778, was actually 3 treaties in one. Although the third one is not well known, it permitted Spain to join the alliance seamlessly when it got good and ready. Between 1776 and 1783, France provided the United States with more than 40 million livres, about a quarter of it in outright gifts. Every year, on the anniversary of the Battle of Yorktown, there is a commemoration at the French cemetery at Yorktown to remember French soldiers and sailors who died fighting for America's independence. The United States defaulted on both principal and interest of the loans in the first half dozen years after the Treaty of Paris, 1783. France did not press for payment. Its own treasury was in such meager health that France was forced to stop payment on its own bills, even while it lived up to its commitment to paying the last installment on its loan to the United States of 6 million livres. That wasn't just pocketbook philanthropy, nor was it pitching chess pieces on the board. France was involved with outcomes. The Battle of Yorktown, October 19, 1781, could not have been won without France. Washington sent Lafayette and 1,200 Continentals to Virginia. His assignment was to keep Lord Cornwallis occupied and agitate him when opportunity permitted. As it happened, Lafayette backed Cornwallis up against the York River and surrounded him. Cornwallis counted on the British Navy to sail into the Chesapeake Bay and up the York River for his escape. He believed Lafayette had more men than he did because Lafayette's spy, James Armistead, was feeding Cornwallis inflated numbers and other false information. Lafayette could not survive a frontal assault had Cornwallis attempted a breakout. Lafayette and Washington needed two things: reinforcements on the ground and a navy to blockade the entrance to Chesapeake Bay. America, you recall, had no navy. Rochambeau and 8,000 Frenchmen began their celebrated march to Yorktown, 680 miles from their camp at Newport, Rhode Island. He joined Washington's forces at White Plains. They had a combined force of 20,000. On September 28th, Lafayette found himself reinforced. Cornwallis surrendered on October 19th, 1781. Claiming illness, Cornwallis would not attend the ceremony, but sent Brigadier General Charles O'Hare to stand in for him. But when O'Hare attempted to surrender the sword to Rochambeau, the French general refused it and nodded to Washington. It was a magnanimous gesture. Although Rochambeau was senior in age and experience, he deferred to Washington as commander-in-chief. In ancient Rome, Cicero said, "Gratitude is the virtue from which all others flow." This 263rd birthday celebration for Lafayette is a good day to give our French friends a nod of thanks. Happy birthday, Marquis de Lafayette.
Hi, I'm Bethany Miller-Euros, LaGrange, Georgia. In 1824, the Marquis de Lafayette was the hero of two worlds. He fought for American independence. He was the last surviving founding father. He survived the French Revolution and wrote the Declaration of the Rights of the Man and of the Citizen. President James Monroe invited him back to America for a farewell tour as the nation's guest. Lafayette accepted. Monroe said he would send a ship to France to fetch him. Lafayette said he would handle it. He would pay his own way. He didn't have the money, still. It was a matter of personal integrity. He borrowed, he sold cows. He sailed aboard the merchant vessel Cadmus on July 13, 1824. He arrived at Staten Island on Sunday, August 15, 1824. Since it was the Sabbath, he delayed his entrance to New York City until the next day. Lafayette's parade, Monday, August 16, 1824, was New York's first such full-blown event. It set the standard for what has since become the Canyon of Heroes Parade. Fully a third of the population showed up. Over 50,000 people lined the lanes. Lafayette was the most famous man in America. He was 67 years old. He visited all 24 states in 13 months. He also visited Wheeling, but West Virginia was not a state at the time. Everywhere he went, there were triumphal arches, banquets, and parades. At the African Free School No. 2 on New York's Mulberry Street, he was officially welcomed by 11-year-old James McCune Smith. Smith would become the first professionally trained black physician in America. At the laying of the cornerstone of the Brooklyn Apprentices Library, he gave a kiss to a 6-year-old Walt Whitman. At Richmond, the honor guard greeting him counted among its members a young Edgar Allan Poe. Lafayette visited with John Adams in Massachusetts and Thomas Jefferson in Virginia. He spent time with future presidents John Quincy Adams and Andrew Jackson. He visited Washington's tomb. At Yorktown, he saw in the crowd a friend dear to him, and he called out his name. He left his carriage and embraced the man. It was James Armistead, who had since become James Lafayette. In Philadelphia, he went out of his way to visit 104-year-old Hannah Till, who had been Lafayette's chef at Yorktown. Informed that she was about to be evicted because she was in arrears on rent, Lafayette quietly arranged for the rent to be paid. Lafayette's 12-day Georgia leg of the farewell tour began at Savannah on March 19, 1825. Then he was on to Augusta, Warrenton, Sparta, Milledgeville, the very young town of Macon, and finally through the forests of West Georgia, south of today's Columbus. He crossed the Chattahoochee River to Fort Mitchell in Alabama on March 31, 1825. Colonel Julius Caesar Alford was a Georgia lawyer. He had been a commander in the Creek War, and he admired Lafayette. Governor George M. Troup appointed him to accompany Lafayette across Georgia. It was Colonel Alford who suggested afterwards that LaGrange become the name of the new county's seat. It was to honor Lafayette, whose beloved home back in France was the Château de LaGrange. Thus were incorporated Troup County in 1826 and LaGrange in 1828. In 1948, a city directory of LaGrange contained a note written by the Chamber of Commerce. It said that Lafayette commented that West Georgia reminded him of home. It's unverified, but it makes for a good story. Lafayette was given an honorary Doctor of Law from William and Mary College. The state of Maryland made him an honorary citizen. Congress awarded him $200,000, and the Lafayette Land Grant, which was 11,520 acres, much of which was eventually located near Tallahassee, Florida. On his 68th birthday, September 6, 1825, he had a state dinner at the White House. The next day, he boarded the Mount Vernon and sailed down the Potomac. Waiting for him at the Chesapeake Bay was the 44-gun frigate USS Brandywine, christened for the Battle of Brandywine, at which he had been wounded back in 1777. 3 weeks later, he was back in France. Never has America seen anything like the farewell tour. America loved Lafayette. Lafayette inspires. Happy birthday, Marquis de Lafayette.
Hi, I'm George Henry LaGrange. It's no accident that the focal point of downtown LaGrange, Georgia, is a splendid statue representing the French Marquis de Lafayette, the extraordinary hero of the American Revolutionary War. Some 50 years after Lafayette's invaluable military and diplomatic service to America, his grand farewell tour into every state brought Lafayette through this section of West Georgia at the end of March, 1825. And it was only a little later that the citizens of yet-to-be-incorporated Troup County chose to honor Lafayette by naming their new county seat after his beloved French home, the Château of LaGrange. Similar recognitions and honors were extended everywhere, not only for his crucial military leadership, but also for later championing basic human rights everywhere, including freedom from state control of religion and freedom from bondage and slavery. The statue of Lafayette in the heart of LaGrange is an exact copy of an original work by Eugene Eole in the city of Le Puy-en-Velay, not far from Lafayette's birthplace in south-central France. Owned by LaGrange College and bestowed on permanent loan to the city, the statue and renovated fountain were gifted by the Callaway Foundation. Their dedication took place in early 1976, as part of LaGrange's celebration of America's bicentennial. On viewing the statue, one sees Lafayette portrayed not as a young American Revolutionary War officer brandishing a sword or astride a great horse. Instead, he is shown here much as he appeared some 10 years later, after returning to France and serving as a staunch champion of liberty everywhere. In the statue's right hand, Lafayette proudly waves the cockade of liberty. It was a red, white, and blue insignia that he designed as a badge of loyalty worn by the French National Guard that he commanded during the early days of the French Revolution. In his lifetime, those three colors, red, white, and blue, and a new French motto, liberty, equality, and fraternity, or brotherhood, would receive recognition everywhere. That's what he is lifting high here for us. Now, let's reflect a little more about the name LaGrange. In the French language, it literally means the barn. But the ancient root word for grange refers to a granary, a place to store nourishing grain and seeds for planting. For the grand tour of 1824-25, Lafayette chose his traveling companion and secretary, Auguste Levasseur, to keep a detailed record of everything they experienced. In the book, published after returning to France, one reads these passages that appear just as they would make it through the forests of West Georgia and cross the Chattahoochee River south of present-day Columbus. Quote, Georgia has an area of 58,000 square miles and population of over 340,000 inhabitants, of which nearly 150,000 are slaves, a truly appalling proportion. That must necessarily lead Georgia into an embarrassing situation one day if its government does not take measures to diminish it. The author goes on. Here, as in all the slave states, blacks are a kind of asset that they sell like other properties and which they can inherit. Prejudices against the colored race are still very strong among Georgians, and I have not noticed them make great efforts in favor of the abolition of slavery. He says, if Georgia is not yet one of the wealthiest states of the Union in the abundance and variety of its products, the cause of it must be attributed only to the influence of slavery. There cannot be a land more favored by nature than this country, and one could easily extract from it all the products of the very best of climates. Following a detailed account of the state's bounteous natural resources, the author then declares this plea of Lafayette. Quote, I urge persons who want to get a fair idea of the resources Georgia offers and of the great things which this state is destined to achieve, finally to listen to the voice of humanity and interest by abolishing slavery. End of quotes. So there was Lafayette in 1825 Georgia, proclaiming what the ancient wisdom had warned forever. St. Paul wrote in Galatians 6:7, whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. Long before that, the Hebrew prophet Hosea had declared, you have planted wickedness, you have reaped evil. And even more dramatically, the book of Proverbs warns, Those who plant injustice will harvest disaster. So the citizens of the new Troup County area chose to honor Lafayette by naming this city after his own LaGrange, effectively calling it a storehouse for grains harvested from seeds planted and well tended. And what would be the result of those grains already being harvested in that culture and economy that was based on racial dominance and exploitation? Well, it was only a year after Lafayette crossed the Chattahoochee into Alabama that Native Americans would begin their forced dislocation westward on the hideous Trail of Tears. And throughout all this region, for decades still to come, African slaves in ever more vast numbers would still be forced to endure extreme hardships and supply the grueling labor for an ever-thriving economy that, by 1860, would make Troup County the fourth wealthiest in Georgia and fifth largest slaveholding county in the state. So here we are, 200 years later. Everywhere now we can and should see the absolute necessity to plant, tend to, and harvest from seeds of liberty, equality, brotherhood, and sisterhood for all. Since 1825, the people of LaGrange and Troup County have declared ourselves identified with Lafayette. With his statue here, we can be reminded of him anew every day. In many ways, ever unfolding, he matters greatly to us all. Lafayette inspires. Happy birthday to the Marquis de Lafayette.
Today we are celebrating Lafayette's birthday, and behind me, this remarkable statue of the Marquis de Lafayette. Let's talk about that statue. Let's take a tour of Lafayette. He's bronze, 10 feet tall. He weighs 1,600 pounds. You calculate that body mass index. This would have been Lafayette after the American Revolutionary War, after the fall of the Bastille, July 14, 1789, just before the beginning of the French Revolution. Lafayette was commander of the Paris National Guard, and in fact, he coined that term, National Guard. The uniform that he wears was his uniform as commander. The focal point of this statue is in his outstretched right hand. It's a Liberty cockade, or as the French call it, a cocarde. Lafayette was searching for a unifying symbol at the time of the French Revolution, and he hit on this idea of a circular pleated ribbon, red, white, and blue. The white represented the monarchy, the red and blue, the people of Paris. Lafayette is flagging us down. He has something to say, and it has to do with that Liberty cockade. Take a look at this statue whole. Lafayette is in motion. The right heel doesn't touch the base. The right knee flexed, the left elbow cocked, and look at his coattails sailing in the breeze. Lafayette is on the move. This is a contrapposto position. It's from Greek sculpture. His left leg carries his weight, his right knee flexed. That means his left leg is engaged and his left hip higher than the right, the free leg. To balance, his right shoulder is higher than the left. Contrapposto. Michelangelo's David is in a contrapposto position. Eye tracking studies and neuroimaging studies show that this position is more appealing to the eye. Notice that Lafayette faces the southeast. I think that's because he wants to see the sunrise. He wants to see the dawn of new beginnings. I'm told by people who claim to know that he's pointed in that direction because it's a better photo op toward the northwest. You have your choice of explanations. Let's drill down on some of the details. This is a statue in the round, which means you can walk around it, as opposed to bas relief, where the statue's chiseled into the wall. Furthermore, we have a worm's eye view. We're down looking up. It gives it a sense of grandeur, as opposed to a bird's eye view from above looking down. Furthermore, let's drill in more on the details. Let's take a look at the fountain. There are 9 segments of piping. Each segment has 35 spigots, except one segment has 34. The second tier has 60 spigots around it. Furthermore, the water's not static. It rotates. It streams from right to left. And if you look at my right side of the fountain, there's a little plaque. It says that all contributions are used to beautify Lafayette Square. You can come and make a wish in front of this fountain. Most wishes in front of this fountain, I'm told, come true, but there is a protocol. You must stand in front of the fountain, your back to the fountain, your eyes closed, coin in your right hand, and toss it over your left shoulder. You must get your coin in the fountain. If you shank it, your wish doesn't come true. Pan up the pedestal. Look at the base. There, chiseled into the base, is the sculptor's name, Ernest Eugene Yeo. Come up and look at the detail. Look at the wrinkling in the boot, the breeches tucked into the boot. Look at the sword. It's plain, not ornate. And then look at the hilt, the handle, the guard, and the pommel. Pommel means little apple. It's the little knob on the end that keeps the sword from flying out of his hand. That pommel has a little lip on it. The lip looks like a liberty cap. This is a liberty pommel. Pan up and you'll see he's got a waistband. That waistband holds that sword in place. He holds his hat in his left hand with the plume on it. That liberty cockade would be attached to the left side of his hat. He'd wear that hat low on his eyebrows with the liberty cockade tilted up. Pan up to his chest. Look at his jacket on the left side. There are 2 medals. One, the one immediate to the left, is the Order of St. Louis. This was given to him by Louis XVI for valor in the American Revolutionary War. Just next to that is the insignia of the Society of the Cincinnati. Cincinnatus was a Roman commander and farmer. Rome had a military emergency. They needed their best commander. The Roman Senate called on Cincinnatus to come from his farm and to take the sword of absolute power. Cincinnatus became a dictator. When the war was won, Cincinnatus came back to the Senate and returned his sword and the power. For centuries, Cincinnatus has been the ideal of unselfish service. The Society of the Cincinnati was organized in 1783. Its members were officers, French and American, from the Revolutionary War. That society exists to this day, and the members are descendants of those same officers. Pan up further, look at the epaulets on both shoulders. When he was a major general in the American Revolutionary War, he had epaulets on both shoulders and 2 stars in each epaulet, signifying that he was a major general and 1 cut below the commander-in-chief. A brigadier general only had 1 star on each side, a colonel, no stars. Pan on up, look at the chin. It's not prominent, but strong. A beaked nose, forehead, high and sloping, very fashionable curled wig, and his hair braided in back. There you have it. You do have homework. You're to haul your children down here, mask and all, and teach them 2 things. Number 1, what Lafayette holds in his right hand. And number 2, what Lafayette stands for. This is open book. Here are the answers. His right hand holds the Liberty Cockade, and Lafayette is an apostle of liberty. He stands for liberty, equality, and justice, the three great ideas we act on. Happy birthday to the Marquis de Lafayette. Thank you for joining us.